Welcome to Deep Fear, where your darkest nightmares turn real. Tonight's story may just keep you awake, so let's start the video. And don't forget to subscribe. My name is Emily Parker. I'm a 24-year-old nurse, fresh out of school, and I thought I had finally landed my dream job. A full-time position at Graceland Memorial Hospital, one of the biggest, oldest hospitals in the city. Everyone told me to avoid the night shift. It'll drain you, they warned. You'll start seeing things. But I didn't listen. I needed the money, and I liked the quiet. My first shift started on a rainy Monday night in February. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and cheap coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering just enough to make my skin crawl. The head nurse, Janet, handed me a stack of paperwork and pointed to the east wing. That section's been closed for years, she said, her voice low. But sometimes patients get moved there temporarily. Just keep an eye out. She looked like she wanted to say more, but stopped herself. I pushed my supply cart down the long, deserted hallway. The doors to each room were labeled with fading numbers and "Do not enter" signs taped carelessly. When I passed room 121, I felt a sudden cold draft, as if someone had opened a window. But when I checked, everything was sealed tight. I shook it off, blaming nerves. After all, it was my first night alone. Around 2 a.m., I found an old nurse's station in the corner of the wing. On the dusty desk was a locked drawer labeled "Incident Reports, Night Shift Only." Curiosity got the best of me. I found a small metal key taped under the desk and slowly opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of manila folders labeled with dates stretching back decades. I pulled one out at random. Patient, Richard Miles, March 5, 1997. I flipped it open. Patient reported seeing figures standing over his bed at night, claimed they whispered his name repeatedly and touched his face. Patient found unresponsive next morning. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. My stomach twisted. I grabbed another file. Patient, Alice Nguyen, September 12, 2003. Claimed she heard children laughing under her bed at night. Complained of constant scratching sounds from inside the walls. Patient died during routine checkup, eyes wide open, fingernails torn off. I slammed the file shut, my hands shaking. The room felt colder now. The shadows along the walls seemed deeper, darker. Then I heard it, a soft scratching coming from room 125. I held my breath, trying to convince myself it was a rat or faulty pipes. But the sound grew louder, like fingernails raking across a door. I crept toward the room, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. As I got closer, I saw the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my foot. Inside, the bed was empty. A thin blanket lay crumpled on the floor. The only other thing in the room was an old IV stand, its metal pole casting a long, crooked shadow on the wall. I stepped in, heart pounding. The scratching stopped immediately. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me, a voice so faint it could have been a breeze. "Emily, come closer." I spun around, no one there. The doorway was empty, the hall silent. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the doorway. When I reached the hallway, I turned and ran. Back at the nurse's station, I locked the drawer and shoved the key into my pocket. I could barely catch my breath. I told myself it was just stress, that I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks. I checked my watch. Only 2:47 a.m. Hours still to go. I sank into the creaky office chair and stared at the files. What had I gotten myself into? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop reading. You don't belong here." I dropped my phone, my fingers numb. I didn't recognize the number. I didn't tell anyone about the files. Outside the nurse's station, the hallway lights flickered off, plunging the entire wing into darkness. Then, slowly, they flickered back on, one by one, as if something was moving down the hallway, controlling them. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out every other sound. That was when I realized I wasn't alone. The moment the lights flickered back on, I grabbed my cart and sprinted down the hallway. My shoes slipped on the polished tiles, echoing too loudly in the empty wing. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. But as I rounded the corner to the exit, I stopped dead. Standing at the far end of the hallway was a figure. It looked like a patient, wearing a thin hospital gown, barefoot, head tilted forward so the hair hid its face. The figure began to shuffle toward me, each step slow and deliberate, my breath caught in my throat. "Emily." The voice was the same whisper I heard in room 125. It drifted down the hall like a breeze, soft but unmistakable. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, deeper into the east wing. I didn't have a plan, only the overwhelming need to escape. I passed darkened rooms, each doorway a black mouth ready to swallow me. Behind me, the slow footsteps continued, never speeding up, but never stopping. I ducked into the old storage room and slammed the door. My hands fumbled for the lock. Once it clicked, I pressed my back against the door and slid to the floor, trying to steady my breathing. The storage room smelled of mildew and antiseptic. Stacks of broken equipment and cardboard boxes lined the walls. In the corner, I saw an old patient file cabinet, half open. I crawled over and yanked the drawer. More files, each labeled with a patient's name and a red stamp reading "Transferred, East Wing." I pulled one out. Patient, Greg Larson, April 19th, 2008. Subject reported seeing mirror people every night. Staff reported waking up to Greg standing at their beds, smiling. Greg found hanging in his room after final incident. My skin crawled. I flipped through more. Patient, Judith Romero, November 2010. Refused to sleep, claimed the man in the gown watched her from the hallway. Patient, Caleb Fields, May 2013. Complained of voices calling him into unused East Wing rooms at night. Found with self-inflicted wounds shaped like eyes on his arms and chest. I felt bile rise in my throat. Why were all these patients transferred here? Was the East Wing ever really meant for treatment? A sudden bang against the storage door snapped me out of it. I dropped the files and pressed my hand over my mouth. Another bang. Then a slow, dragging sound, like fingernails scraping the door. "Emily, come out." The voice was right on the other side now. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream. I needed to get out, but there was only one door. I glanced at the narrow supply window high on the wall. I scrambled onto a stack of boxes and tried to push the window open. It was stuck tight, painted shut over years of neglect. The door handle rattled. Then it stopped. Silence. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. Nothing. I waited another minute, 2. Finally, I dared to unlock the door and crack it open. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. I slipped out, clutching the key from the nurse's station and one of the patient files in my pocket. My legs felt like rubber, but I forced myself forward. As I neared the old nurse's station, I heard another sound. This time it wasn't a voice. It was crying. A woman's soft sobs echoing faintly from room 121. I peeked inside. The bed was now occupied. A woman sat curled up, hugging her knees. Her hair hung in wet strands over her face, and her hospital gown clung to her thin frame. She looked up. Her eyes were hollow, pitch-black pits. Her mouth opened, and instead of words, a low, gurgling hiss spilled out. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the threshold. She stood and stepped toward me, her limbs jerking unnaturally like a puppet, her head tilted to the side, cracking loudly. "Help me," she gurgled, black fluid dripping from her mouth. I turned and ran, sprinting past the nurse's station and toward the main exit. I didn't look back. When I finally reached the main lobby, it was empty. The security desk was deserted, the front doors wide open to the rain-soaked parking lot. I ran into the night, soaked and shaking, never stopping until I reached my car. As I sat there, gasping, I realized I still had the patient file clutched in my fist. I opened it and read the last line. Emily Parker, scheduled for transfer February 13th. Today was February 13th. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, shivering as rain pelted the windshield. My mind replayed that file over and over. Emily Parker, scheduled for transfer February 13th. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 3:03 a.m. It was still February 13th. I thought about calling someone. My mom, a friend, anyone. But what would I even say? That ghosts were chasing me? That a file predicted my death? I tried to start the car, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, a terrified nurse on the verge of a breakdown. Then I saw them. Figures in hospital gowns, drifting through the parking lot in the rain. They moved slowly, their heads down, arms hanging limply at their sides. Their skin glowed faintly under the lot's yellow security lights. They didn't seem real, more like pale smudges or afterimages burned into my eyes. One figure looked up. Its face was blank, except for two wide, dark holes where eyes should be. It began moving toward my car. I fumbled with the keys, finally jamming them into the ignition. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. Another figure appeared by the passenger window. It pressed its palm against the glass. Thin, translucent fingers leaving a smudge that looked like dark mold. "Emily, come back!" I screamed and kicked the door open, stumbling out into the rain. I bolted across the lot, slipping and sliding on the wet asphalt. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I ran to the ER entrance and pounded on the doors until a young intern let me in. He looked horrified when he saw me. Soaked, bruised, bleeding from scrapes on my knees and elbows. "Help me," I begged. "They're after me. The East Wing. The files." He backed away, eyes wide. Another nurse came over and gently took my arm. "You need to lie down," she said softly. "We'll get someone to help you." I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than she looked. She guided me to a curtained-off bed and handed me a warm blanket. I curled up, shivering uncontrollably. A few minutes later, a security guard arrived. Not one I recognized. His uniform looked older, faded, as if it had been worn for decades. He had deep scars on his cheeks and a crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily Parker?" he asked, glancing at a clipboard. I froze. "It's time," he said calmly. Before I could scream, two orderlies appeared behind him. They grabbed me by the arms, lifting me off the bed as if I weighed nothing. I kicked and struggled, but they carried me easily down a long hallway. We passed modern, brightly lit rooms, then turned sharply and descended a set of concrete stairs I had never noticed before. The deeper we went, the colder the air became. The lights grew dimmer, the walls older, cracked and stained. Finally, we reached a heavy metal door labeled East Wing, restricted access. The guard unlocked it with a large iron key and pushed it open. A blast of frigid air hit my face. Beyond the door, The hallway was dark except for small red emergency lights glowing faintly along the floor. The walls were covered in peeling paint and deep scratch marks, some forming words. "Help us, don't let him in. Emily, my name." They dragged me forward, past rooms filled with old gurneys and broken medical equipment. Some rooms had beds, each occupied by a figure in a gown, unmoving but breathing shallowly. Their eyes followed me as I passed, but their heads never turned. Struggled harder, screaming until my throat burned. Finally, they pushed open another door. A cold operating theater stood beyond. Rusty surgical tools lay scattered across a tray. In the center of the room was a single bed with restraints. A figure stood beside it, a man in a surgeon's gown and mask, but his eyes were all wrong. They were milky white, with no pupils, and wept dark fluid down his cheeks. "Welcome back, Emily," he croaked, his voice echoing strangely. "Your transfer has been approved." I kicked and thrashed, but they strapped me down. The surgeon lifted a large syringe filled with inky black liquid. I looked up at the ceiling, where old, yellowed tiles bore bloody handprints. I tried to focus on anything else. Anything except the cold steel pressing against my arm. "This will only hurt forever," the surgeon whispered. Then he pushed the needle into my vein. I felt the darkness flood me instantly, cold and heavy, as if my blood had turned to tar. My screams echoed off the walls, mixing with the faint wails and whispers of the other patients. Then, everything faded to black. I don't know how long I was gone. When I woke up, I was no longer in the operating theater. I lay in a small, windowless room with faded green walls. The air was freezing and smelled like antiseptic and rust. My body felt heavy. When I looked down, I saw thick leather restraints around my wrists and ankles, pinning me to a metal bed. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, as if I had been screaming for days. Then I heard it, a steady, rhythmic beeping. I turned my head painfully and saw an old heart monitor hooked to my arm. The screen glitched, flickering between my heartbeat and strange lines of text. "Stay still, sleep. Transfer complete." I began to cry, my tears burning hot on my frozen skin. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. A moment later, the door creaked open. The surgeon stepped inside, accompanied by two pale orderlies. Under his mask, I could see the black fluid constantly dripping from the corners of his eyes and mouth, staining his gown. "Good morning, Emily," he rasped. "Your procedure was a success. You're finally ready for your purpose." I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a hoarse rasp. "Why? Me?" He tilted his head, as if confused by the question. "You volunteered, of course. You chose the night shift." He stepped closer, one cold hand brushing my forehead. "Those who wander at night, who seek answers in the dark places, they are the ones we need most. Your curiosity opened the door." I shook my head weakly. "No, please, let me go." He chuckled, the sound wet and rattling. "You are already gone, Emily. You are only a vessel now." The orderlies began to disconnect the IV lines from my arms, moving with robotic precision. Then, they lifted me off the bed and strapped me into a wheelchair. My body wouldn't respond. I felt like a puppet, strings cut and retied by invisible hands. They pushed me down the hallway. As we moved, I saw glimpses into other rooms. Each room held a patient strapped to a bed, just like me. Some were screaming silently, their mouths wide but no sound escaping. Some were convulsing, dark veins snaking under their skin. Others just stared at the ceiling, eyes unblinking, as if watching something the rest of us could not see. Then I saw a room with mirrors covering every wall. A woman inside clawed at her own reflection, her fingers bloody stumps. As I passed, she locked eyes with me and mouthed one word over and over: "Run." But there was nowhere to run. Finally, we stopped in front of a large metal door labeled "Waking Room." The surgeon pushed it open. Inside was a massive space lined with medical equipment, old gurneys, and dozens of empty wheelchairs. The center of the room held a single operating table under a harsh white light. They unstrapped me and lifted me onto the table. Above me, surgical lamps clicked on one by one, each casting long, harsh shadows across my face. I felt straps tighten around my arms and legs again. The surgeon leaned close, his empty eyes inches from mine. "Tonight, you join them. You become part of the East Wing family." Then he stepped aside. A new figure emerged from the shadows. It was the woman from room 121, the one who had gurgled for help. But now she stood tall and calm, her gown pristine, her eyes wide and empty. She raised a scalpel, holding it with unnatural steadiness. "She is ready to receive," the surgeon whispered behind her. She pressed the cold blade to my chest just below my collarbone. I screamed, the sound tearing from my lungs. She carved a single deep line down the center of my chest, then another across it, forming a crude cross. Blood pooled under me, soaking the table. Then she dropped the scalpel and pressed her hands into the wound. I felt something shift inside me, as if something alive and hungry was pushing its way in. I convulsed violently. A blinding white light filled my vision, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Join us! Join us! Join us!" I felt my mind cracking, splintering into pieces, each piece screaming in terror. The world around me seemed to dissolve into darkness and static. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. I opened my eyes. I was standing now in the middle of the waking room. I looked down at my hands, clean, pale, unscarred. I touched my face, smooth, no tears, no blood. In the corner of the room, I saw my own body still strapped to the table, eyes wide open, mouth hanging slack. I turned and saw the surgeon watching me, smiling. "Welcome, Emily," he said. "You're finally awake." I stood there, staring at my own body on the table. Its chest was still open, skin flayed like an anatomical diagram. My face looked peaceful, almost like I was sleeping, but my eyes were wide and empty. I looked at my new hands again, flexing my fingers. They felt lighter, stronger, like they weren't mine at all. The surgeon stepped forward, his dark, fluid eyes locked on me. "You see now, Emily," he said softly. "The East Wing is not just a place, it's a state of being, a shift beyond flesh." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a low vibration passed through my body, rattling my teeth. The woman from room 121 emerged behind him, her movements elegant and smooth now, as if she had practiced for centuries. She tilted her head, studying me like an insect pinned under glass. "We've been waiting for you," she said in a new, melodic voice. "You are special, curious, brave. You are the perfect vessel." The surgeon nodded, smiling wide enough to tear the skin at the corners of his mouth. "Your consciousness is now unbound. You are free to wander the halls to guide the next ones, to help us grow." I turned to the walls of the waking room. New figures began to emerge from the shadows, translucent shapes of other former patients, their forms shifting and twitching. Some wore hospital gowns, some wore scrubs, some wore tattered street clothes, as if they had been collected from outside. They pressed close to me, whispering in dozens of overlapping voices. "Join us. We see you. We know your thoughts, your fears." I stumbled backward, but my legs felt boneless, almost liquid. I passed through one of the figures, feeling its cold presence slide through my chest like ice water. I tried to scream again, but instead I heard my own voice echo back to me, distorted and hollow. "Welcome home, Emily." The surgeon placed a cold, wet hand on my shoulder. "You are now part of the night shift, the eternal shift. We never sleep and we never die." Suddenly, I felt a strong pull. My consciousness snapped forward, and I found myself drifting down the familiar East Wing hallway. I floated past the nurse's station, past the old patient rooms. I saw my reflection in a cracked window, pale, translucent, my eyes like deep black holes. Below me, a new nurse pushed a cart, humming nervously. She looked young, tired. I saw a name tag on her uniform, Sarah. I felt an instinctive hunger, a compulsion to watch her, to follow her. I heard the other voices encouraging me. "Guide her. Bring her in. She is curious, just like you." I tried to resist. I reached for the ceiling, the walls, anything that might stop my descent. But I couldn't stop. I hovered behind Sarah as she unlocked a supply closet. She froze, shivering, and glanced over her shoulder. I saw her eyes widen in terror as she felt my presence. I wanted to warn her, to tell her to run, but my new form obeyed the East Wing's will. Sarah dropped her clipboard and ran, her screams echoing down the hallway. I felt a rush of cold joy ripple through me. I realized then, there was no escape, no final door to burst through, no exit to the rain-soaked parking lot. I was part of this place now, just another shadow waiting in the dark. And every time a new nurse, doctor, or patient wandered into the East Wing at night, I would be waiting. Because that's what the East Wing is, not a building, a hunger, a new shift, the true night shift. Emily, come back, and so I do. Over and over again. My name is David Morales. I'm a 31-year-old security guard, and for the past 2 years, I've worked the graveyard shift at St. Vincent Psychiatric Hospital. Most people think psych hospitals are haunted places, even in the daylight. They don't know how much worse they are when the sun goes down. I took this job because it paid well and allowed me to pay off debts faster. But lately, I started to feel like I wasn't alone during my rounds. It wasn't just the patients whispering behind locked doors or the echo of old pipes. It was something deeper, a crawling presence under my skin. 2 weeks ago, my supervisor gave me a new assignment. "Start patrolling the abandoned North Wing," he said, "especially room 309. Make sure no one goes inside." When I asked why, he just looked away. "Don't ask questions, just do your job." That night, I started my first patrol in the North Wing. The hallways felt wrong the moment I stepped in. The walls were yellowed and cracked, lined with old patient nameplates. Most of the doors were chained shut, some with broken locks hanging uselessly. Room 309 was at the very end of the hall. Its door looked newer than the others, with a heavy deadbolt and an extra padlock. A large sign read, "Restricted, do not enter." At first, I thought it was just another storage area. But when I shined my flashlight through the small window in the door, I saw a bed. A single bed with restraints. And someone was sitting on it. A woman in a pale hospital gown. Long black hair covered her face. She sat perfectly still, hands resting on her lap, her head slightly bowed. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or some leftover training dummy, but then she moved. Just a small twitch of her head, like a bird sensing danger. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. When I looked again, she hadn't moved. I tried to radio my supervisor, but all I got was static. Finally, after a few tries, I heard a voice crackle through. "Stay out of 309. Whatever you do, stay out." Then it went dead. I ran back to the main security office and spent the rest of my shift watching the hallway camera. Room 309's door never opened. The woman never left. She just sat there, motionless, as if waiting. When my relief came in the morning, I tried to explain what I saw. He just shrugged. "Don't worry about that wing, man. Nobody's supposed to be there anyway." I went home, barely slept, and came back the next night dreading what I might find. Sure enough, when I passed 309 again, she was there. This time, her head was tilted up slightly, almost as if she were listening. Her hair still covered most of her face, but I thought I saw her lips moving. I pressed my ear to the glass. A faint whisper slipped out. "Help me. Please. It hurts. So much." I staggered back, heart hammering. It wasn't a recording or an echo. It was real. Against every instinct I had, I felt the urge to unlock the door, to help her. I reached into my pocket for my keys, my fingers trembling. That's when I saw something move in the reflection of the hallway window. A dark shape stood behind me. Tall, featureless, watching. I spun around. No one was there. When I looked back through the window, she was now standing right at the door, her face almost pressed against the glass. I fell backward, my flashlight clattering to the floor. Her voice slid through the crack in the door like a cold draft. "Please, don't leave me here. Let me out." I crawled away, grabbed my flashlight, and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the main office, door locked, lights on. I watched the monitors until sunrise, too scared to move. Next day, I thought about quitting. I even packed up my uniform and badge, but something inside me felt drawn back, like a hook in my brain pulling me toward room 309. That night, I returned for my shift, and I knew I would go back to her. I barely made it through the day after that second night. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat on my bed, staring at the wall, replaying her voice over and over in my head. "Please, don't leave me here. Let me out." When it was time for my shift, I almost called in sick, but I knew I wouldn't. It felt like my entire mind was magnetized to that room, like it was calling me. When I arrived, the supervisor handed me the keys and said nothing. He looked pale, his eyes sunken. As I took the keys from his trembling hand, I saw a small scar on his wrist, shaped like a cross. I started to ask about it, but he just shook his head and hurried away. I started my rounds as usual, walking past the empty rec room, the abandoned cafeteria. I could feel the north wing pressing on my mind like a weight. When I finally turned the corner, I saw room 309's door. This time, the window was dark. I felt a sudden urge to run down the hall and check. I sprinted forward, skidding to a stop in front of the door. I shined my flashlight inside. Empty. The bed was there. The restraints undone, the sheets stained with something dark. But she was gone. My heart felt like it stopped beating. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered, buzzing loudly. Then the hallway plunged into darkness. I swung my flashlight around wildly. Somewhere behind me, I heard the click of bare feet on the tile floor. Slow, measured. I turned and saw her at the far end of the hall, standing under the flickering emergency light. Her hair hung in front of her face, dripping some thick, dark liquid onto the floor. She raised a shaking hand and pointed at me. "David, please, help me!" My knees nearly buckled. How did she know my name? I forced myself to move forward. I needed to see her, to help her. As I approached, she took a step backward, then another. She moved slowly, her feet sliding across the floor with a wet, slurping sound. She turned the corner into an old therapy room. I followed. The therapy room was pitch black. I moved my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the dusty air. I saw old therapy chairs, overturned tables. A single mirror on the far wall cracked into a spiderweb pattern. In the center of the room, she stood facing the mirror. Her reflection was twisted, limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. I raised my flashlight higher and finally saw her face. Her mouth was stretched open in a permanent scream, her lips split and torn, as if sewn open and then ripped apart. Her eyes were two deep, dark pits, so black they looked endless. In that endless darkness, I saw shapes moving, hands, faces, mouths silently screaming. She reached toward the mirror, her fingers touched the glass, and the cracks spread wider, splintering outward with loud snaps. Then she turned her head slowly toward me. "You let me out," she gurgled. I tried to step backward, but my feet wouldn't move. My body felt glued to the floor. She started to shuffle toward me. Her arms opened wide, her fingers twitching like hooked claws. I forced myself to look away from her face. I saw a small doorway to the left, an old storage closet. I lunged for it and slammed the door behind me. Inside, it was pitch black. I pressed my back against the wall, covering my mouth to muffle my ragged breathing. Then I heard her, outside the door, breathing heavily. "David, don't. Hide." Her fingernails scraped slowly across the door. I could hear each individual drag, like claws on bone. I pressed harder against the wall, eyes squeezed shut. Then I felt it. Something cold and wet wrapped around my ankle. I looked down and saw a black, tar-like hand slithering under the door, fingers wrapping tightly. I screamed and kicked, but the grip only tightened, pulling me toward the crack. Suddenly, the door burst open. She stood above me, her mouth opening wider, wider, until it split her face in half. From inside, I saw countless smaller mouths, each whispering in unison, "Let us in." I was yanked forward, swallowed by the darkness pouring out of her. Then everything went silent. I opened my eyes and found myself lying on the floor outside room 309. My flashlight flickered weakly beside me. I grabbed it, sat up, and looked around. The hallway was empty. No sign of her. I pulled myself to my feet, trembling. I thought about leaving forever. But something deep inside told me it wasn't over. When I stood up, my legs barely supported me. The air in the north wing felt thicker, as if I was breathing through wet cloth. I looked at the door to room 309 again. It was closed now. No sign that she had ever come out. I stumbled back to the main security office. As I passed one of the old mirrors in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. At first, I didn't recognize myself. My skin looked grayish, my eyes sunken. But worse, behind me I saw a dark shape, a thin black silhouette with long fingers, standing right over my shoulder. When I spun around, there was nothing there. I bolted into the office and locked the door. I dropped into the chair and tried to calm my breathing. I checked the monitors, looking for any sign of her. Room 309's feed was static now, the screen flickering and buzzing. I wiped sweat from my forehead and felt something sticky. I pulled my hand away. Black. Thick, tar-like liquid oozed from a small cut just above my temple. I ran to the bathroom and turned on the light. My face was pale, veins dark under the skin, spreading in thin, spider-like webs. My eyes looked wrong, darker, as if something inside was looking out at me. Suddenly, my radio crackled. "David, come back!" The voice was faint, garbled. I tried to respond, but my throat felt tight, clogged. When I finally forced out a sound, it wasn't my voice. It was a low, wet whisper. "She's here. I dropped the radio in horror. I turned to run, but pain stabbed through my skull, dropping me to my knees. I clutched my head, feeling something moving under my skin. In the corner of my eye, I saw shadows crawling across the walls, long arms stretching, grasping, pulling themselves closer. I heard whispers coming from the vents above, thousands of voices chanting in unison, "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" My vision blurred. The walls around me looked like they were melting, dripping into puddles of black sludge. I crawled toward the office door, but every movement felt heavier, like something was holding me down. I finally reached the handle, flung the door open, and collapsed into the hallway. I dragged myself down the hall, nails scraping along the tiles. Each whisper echoed in my bones. "Room 309. Come home." I looked up and saw the hallway stretching impossibly far, as if the building had grown. Room 309's door seemed to pulse, breathing slowly like a living lung. Something in my mind snapped. I pushed myself up and stumbled forward. My head felt like it was splitting open from the inside, pressure building behind my eyes. As I got closer to room 309, I felt warmth dripping down my neck. I touched it, black fluid, thicker than blood. When I reached the door, it swung open on its own. Inside, the room was pitch black except for the faint outline of the bed. She was waiting, sitting on the bed, head down. When I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. She slowly lifted her head. Her mouth stretched wider than humanly possible, splitting her face nearly in half. From her gaping maw, dozens of tiny hands reached out, clawing at the air. I tried to scream, but only a gargled hiss came out. My feet moved on their own, stepping closer. "You belong to me," she whispered, her voice echoing inside my skull. She stood up, and the hands from her mouth gripped my shoulders. They pulled me forward into her darkness. I felt myself falling, deeper and deeper, swallowed by that endless void. Inside, I saw countless faces, other guards, other patients, all stuck in silent screams, their mouths open, eyes wide. Their hands reached for me, pulling me further down. In that final moment before everything went black, I realized I was never meant to protect room 309. I was meant to join it. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was standing in a vast, dark space, a void that felt endless in every direction. Above me, there was no ceiling. Below me, no floor. Just a shifting, liquid darkness that rippled and churned like a living sea. I looked down and saw that I was no longer wearing my uniform. Instead, I wore a pale, torn hospital gown, just like hers. My skin looked translucent, my veins black as ink, writhing just beneath the surface. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy. I opened my eyes and found myself lying on the floor outside room 309. My flashlight flickered weakly beside me. I grabbed it, sat up, and looked around. The hallway was empty. No sign of her. I pulled myself to my feet, trembling. I thought about leaving forever. But something deep inside told me it wasn't over. When I stood up, my legs barely supported me. The air in the north wing felt thicker, as if I was breathing through wet cloth. I looked at the door to room 309 again. It was closed now. No sign that she had ever come out. I stumbled back to the main security office. As I passed one of the old mirrors in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. At first, I didn't recognize myself. My skin looked grayish, my eyes sunken. But worse, behind me I saw a dark shape, a thin black silhouette with long fingers, standing right over my shoulder. When I spun around, there was nothing there. I bolted into the office and locked the door. I dropped into the chair and tried to calm my breathing. I checked the monitors, looking for any sign of her. Room 309's feed was static now, the screen flickering and buzzing. I wiped sweat from my forehead and felt something sticky. I pulled my hand away. Black. Thick, tar-like liquid oozed from a small cut just above my temple. I ran to the bathroom and turned on the light. My face was pale, veins dark under the skin, spreading in thin, spider-like webs. My eyes looked wrong, darker, as if something inside was looking out at me. Suddenly, my radio crackled. "David, come back!" The voice was faint, garbled. I tried to respond, but my throat felt tight, clogged. When I finally forced out a sound, it wasn't my voice. It was a low, wet whisper. "She's here." I dropped the radio in horror. I turned to run, but pain stabbed through my skull, dropping me to my knees. I clutched my head, feeling something moving under my skin. In the corner of my eye, I saw shadows crawling across the walls, long arms stretching, grasping, pulling themselves closer. I heard whispers coming from the vents above, thousands of voices chanting in unison, "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" My vision blurred. The walls around me looked like they were melting, dripping into puddles of black sludge. I crawled toward the office door, but every movement felt heavier, like something was holding me down. I finally reached the handle, flung the door open, and collapsed into the hallway. I dragged myself down the hall, nails scraping along the tiles. Each whisper echoed in my bones. Room 309. Come home. I looked up and saw the hallway stretching impossibly far, as if the building had grown. Room 309's door seemed to pulse, breathing slowly like a living lung. Something in my mind snapped. I pushed myself up and stumbled forward. My head felt like it was splitting open from the inside, pressure building behind my eyes. As I got closer to room 309, I felt warmth dripping down my neck. I touched it, black fluid, thicker than blood. When I reached the door, it swung open on its own. Inside, the room was pitch black except for the faint outline of the bed. She was waiting, sitting on the bed, head down. When I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. She slowly lifted her head. Her mouth stretched wider than humanly possible, splitting her face nearly in half. From her gaping maw, dozens of tiny hands reached out, clawing at the air. I tried to scream, but only a gargled hiss came out. My feet moved on their own, stepping closer. "You belong to me," she whispered, her voice echoing inside my skull. She stood up, and the hands from her mouth gripped my shoulders. They pulled me forward into her darkness. I felt myself falling, deeper and deeper, swallowed by that endless void. Inside, I saw countless faces, other guards, other patients, all stuck in silent screams, their mouths open, eyes wide. Their hands reached for me, pulling me further down. In that final moment before everything went black, I realized I was never meant to protect room 309. I was meant to join it. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was standing in a vast, dark space, a void that felt endless in every direction. Above me, there was no ceiling. Below me, no floor. Just a shifting, liquid darkness that rippled and churned like a living sea. I looked down and saw that I was no longer wearing my uniform. Instead, I wore a pale, torn hospital gown just like hers. My skin looked translucent, my veins black as ink, writhing just beneath the surface. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if I was pushing through thick mud. Every step sent ripples across the blackness below. In the distance, I saw shapes, Dozens of figures suspended in the dark, their bodies hanging like marionettes on invisible strings. Their faces were twisted in silent agony, mouths stretched open, eyes wide and glassy. As I watched, some of them twitched, their heads jerking violently as if trying to scream. Then I realized I recognized some of them. A nurse I used to greet during the night shift, a patient who had disappeared weeks ago, even a former guard whose name tag I had found in the locker room months before. One figure began to drift toward me. Her head twitched back and forth, her hair sticking to her wet, gray skin. I knew it was her, the woman from room 309, but now she looked different, more real, more monstrous. As she floated closer, I saw dozens of tiny mouths moving across her skin. Some whispered, some giggled, some sobbed uncontrollably. She reached out a hand. When her fingers touched my chest, they burned ice cold, and I felt something tear inside me. I looked down and saw my chest split open without a sound. Black fluid poured out, and dozens of thin, dark tendrils began to push their way out of my ribs, writhing and lashing the air. "Let us in," she whispered. "Let us use you. You're ours now." I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Instead, I felt my head snap back, my jaw splitting wider than I thought possible. I felt something crawling up my throat. 1,000 voices shrieked in unison from inside me. "We are free! We are free!" She pressed her face closer to mine. I felt her mouths attached to my skin, sucking, tearing, sharing their darkness. Visions flooded my mind, hundreds of memories that weren't mine. Patients strapped to beds, doctors performing twisted experiments, guards forced to feed the mouth that lived in room 309. All of it led to one terrible realization. Room 309 wasn't just a room. It was a living entity, a gate to a deeper, darker place. It fed on pain, fear, and despair, turning its victims into hosts. I felt my mind splintering, my memories shattered, replaced by images of endless hallways, rooms filled with shadows, faces that melted into the walls. I felt myself dissolving, piece by piece. Then I saw her eyes, for the first time the woman's true eyes, two endless pits, each filled with swirling black masses of screaming faces. When I looked into them, I felt my last shred of self vanish. Suddenly I was back in the hospital hallway. Room 309's door stood open behind me. I turned to look inside. On the bed, I saw myself strapped down, my face pale and lifeless, eyes wide open and mouth hanging slack. But I was also standing there outside my own body, a ghost, a husk. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer flesh, but dripping black tendrils. I touched my face, my mouth stretched open, more of the dark fluid seeping out. Behind me, I heard other footsteps. I turned and saw new staff members entering the hallway. A new nurse, a young doctor. They looked confused, reading their clipboards. I felt a new hunger rise inside me, the same urge that had dragged me to room 309, the need to spread, to feed, to bring them in. In that moment, I knew I had become part of room 309 forever, a new lure for the next victim. "Welcome to your shift," I heard the voices say inside my head, and I smiled, my jaw splitting open into a black abyss. I stood in the hallway, no longer human. My skin dripped black tendrils that twitched and reached toward anything warm. I could hear everything, the blood pumping in the new nurse's veins, the stutter in the doctor's heartbeat, even the tiny vibrations of their teeth chattering in fear. I watched them, their eyes wide as they stepped closer, reading the sign on room 309. Restricted, do not enter. Their curiosity was like a bright light in the dark. It burned deliciously. The doctor turned to the nurse. Did you hear something?" The nurse shook her head, her face pale. I think someone's in there." I stepped forward, my tendrils sliding along the floor silently. My mouth stretched open, rows of black, jagged teeth shifting inside. I didn't need to speak. My presence alone pulled at them, a cold whisper inside their skulls. They both turned to look at me at the same time, their eyes glazed over as my shadow swallowed them. Their bodies froze, muscles tensing. They couldn't scream, couldn't run. I drifted closer, tendrils curling up their legs and around their throats. They shivered violently as the darkness entered them, curling up into their lungs, squeezing their hearts. I saw their minds, their memories, their fears. All of it tasted sweet. Suddenly, they dropped to their knees, eyes rolling back. From their mouths, black fluid bubbled up, dripping onto their uniforms and the white tile floor. They began to whisper in unison, their voices layered and echoing strangely. "Room 309, join us! Room 309! Their bodies convulsed and then went still. Slowly, they stood up. Their faces slack, mouths drooping open, eyes now empty black pools. They turned to face room 309's door. They stepped inside. I followed them, slipping into the room that had become my prison and my cathedral. The room now looked endless, its walls stretching out into darkness. Beds lined both sides, each occupied by figures strapped down, twitching and moaning quietly. In the center of the room she stood, the woman who started it all. She no longer looked human. Her entire body was covered in shifting mouths, some opening and closing silently, others dripping black saliva. When she saw me, she spread her arms wide. "Welcome home," she said in a voice that echoed through every mouth on her body. I dropped to my knees, my tendrils digging into the floor like roots. I felt myself merging further, dissolving. The nurse and doctor joined the rows of beds, their bodies slowly transforming, black veins spreading beneath their skin like cracks in glass. The woman moved toward me, her mouth smiling. She pressed her many hands against my head, and I felt my final memories slip away. My mother's face, my childhood bedroom, my favorite music, gone. In their place, a single command: feed. I felt my new limbs growing longer, my senses expanding through the walls and vents of the hospital. I could see into every room, every hallway. I saw new patients arriving, new staff members preparing for their shifts. I realized then, room 309 wasn't a room anymore. It was me. It was the hospital. It was every whisper in the dark, every cold breath against a nurse's neck, every echo in an empty hallway. As my mind fractured and finally dissolved into pure hunger, I heard the voices one last time. "Welcome to the night shift, David. We've been waiting for you." Then, there was only darkness and the endless feeding. If you enjoyed this nightmare, like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.